Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I am speaking with Patrick Lockwood again. Patrick is a psychologist and he specializes a bit on addiction. And we've spoken once before, and today I wanted to talk to him about a Twitter DM exchange that we had.
Mm-hmm.
So, hey Patrick, thanks for coming back on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So basically, I had this little hypothesis and I sent you a DM. And I mean, if you can poke holes in it or whatever, I don't know if I've got anything with this. But basically, it went back to, if you looked at the gangs in the 80s, and then you had like a resurgence of white supremacist groups, and all the stuff that was done to, like, the anti-gang work and, de-radicalization at that point. I don't think they use that term, though.
Mm-hmm.
These guys were going after the disillusioned kids. They were going after the loners. They were going after the ones that felt that society had wronged them somehow or other. They were, victims. Like, they had a profile for what the majority of these people were. And it could be across any class, rich or poor. I mean, you saw it with the 9/11 bombers. They were like engineers and doctors. They weren't uneducated.
Right.
And so any work that's going on in counterterrorism now, they're saying the kind of the same things. Like in the mosques and stuff, they're going after people who are disillusioned. Now, after reading critical race theory, after reading, queer theory, all this stuff, intersectionality, and then looking at how it's going into the school curriculums, all I can see is you're getting people who are so hyper-focused on how they've either victimized people or they've been victims. I just see it creating more divisions and creating more people that fit the profile of someone that can be picked up by, any type of extremist. So,
sure.
Like I said, I don't know if I have anything there or if I'm just, tilting at windmills or, like I said, poke holes in it, please.
Sure. I wish I could poke some substantive holes in it, but unfortunately, the first problem is I'm not as knowledgeable as I could be about the history of gangs and changing behavior through kind of working with the most victimized and the most, let's say, outcast groups of people. I can speak to, generally speaking, my experience with gangs that, of course, the people on the fringes tend to get called in because, they don't have a home, so they need to find a home somewhere. So that makes intuitive sense to me. And what's more important here is, as a clinical psychologist, is how this process of the critical theorists kind of grabbing the people at the fringes who are really badly struggling, and even, I would say, the people who are not as badly struggling at the fringes are being inculcated in these, theoretical gangs. I think theoretical gangs is probably the best way to describe them, and I just came up with that off the top of my head. It sounds so true because they are theory gangs. It's a mob mentality, but it's more like a gang. It's more gang than is straight up mob. And the problem here is, let's just say for the sake of argument that you yourself have experienced some serious trauma. Maybe you were assaulted somewhere, etc., and that left a mark on you, and sometimes you have kind of classic symptoms of PTSD. You have intrusive thoughts. Maybe you remember the scary thing that happened to you too consistently. Maybe you have flashbacks. Maybe you have hypervigilance, looking for signs of that scary thing to happen again. You got assaulted by a guy, so now every guy that looks like that person that assaulted you kind of triggers you, right? So the problem is if you were victimized, and let's just say for the sake of argument, you had this all-knowing force, a psychologist, who said, hey, I'm so sorry that you've been victimized. It's terrible that you're a victim. In fact, you need to own the fact that you're a victim. And that needs to be the most important thing about you. In fact, you should focus on it even more. In fact, it should be the most important part of who you are. And you should revel in that fear and in that panic and in that terror. And you should have nightmares more and all that stuff. That is the equivalent of what these critical theorists are doing. Is let's focus, at the extremes especially. They're saying, let's take this facet of your identity, the fact that you were a victim because of your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, whatever it is, and let's make that the most important part of you. Let's not focus on your strengths. And positive psychology is mostly bullshit, but let's not focus on your strengths, right? Let's not focus on Let's not focus on the facets of you that are adaptive, that are functioning well, that have not been victimized. Let's focus on this one part of you that is probably not even the most important part of you as a person. And let's make sure that is the thing that runs your mentality all day long. So they're intentionally traumatizing people. And as a psychologist, I'm like, what the hell's going on here? That's insane.
Yeah.
That's crazy making.
Okay, I was speaking to a friend of mine recently, just before Halloween, and he's roughly the same age as me. I'm 50, and he was taking his son to the store to buy costumes, and he's listening to the other parents and the kids, and these kids are, let's say 9 to 12, and they're like, the kids are telling the parents, I can't wear that because that might be offensive to someone.
The kids are telling the parents.
Yeah. And the parents are scratching their heads.
Yeah.
Now, okay, I'm not saying you dress your kid up in a KKK costume, but if your little daughter wants to be Mulan or your son wants to be Aladdin, buy them the goddamn costume. You don't have to go full Justin Trudeau and do the shoe polish modeling to wear the Aladdin costume. But, the kid can put on a costume, right?
Right.
But, 9 and 10-year-olds should not be thinking about this is going to, and then someone's going to say, well, you're saying you don't want kids to not know about racism. No, okay, it's there, it's out there. But equating innocent things like this, because this is innocent. It's a kid wanting to dress up like a cartoon character. I don't know how much more innocent you can get with that. And
sure.
and you're you're making these kids just so focused on this. Like, I don't see how you can, like, once you start, okay, like I said, especially if they're preteens and they start going into adolescence thinking like this. You already got so much other stuff going on. Like, all the raging hormones and everything.
Yeah.
Throw this into the mix. I don't see how we're going to get healthy, functional adults out of this.
I don't think we can. And that was one of the points of Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff in The Coddling of the American Mind. There are these ideologies that are creating I would say, a rather, kind of feeble mind, a mind that is not capable of withstanding basic stressors. So they kind of collapse at everything that happens. I think that was basically the point of the book, and that's ludicrous, right? That's absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah.
Not everything is going to make someone crumble. A costume is not typically going to make someone crumble and fall apart and have PTSD. Like, it might be slightly offensive, but there's nothing wrong with being offended.
Yeah, but okay, there's, an adult, again, I don't want to harp on the Justin Trudeau thing, but it's just because it's such a prime example of it.
Yeah.
Him doing that as a teacher.
Yeah.
In a school.
Yeah.
There's okay, someone taking an offense at that is a little bit more credible than someone taking an offense at a 10-year-old dressed up as either Mulan or Aladdin or Pocahontas or whatever, right? That 10-year-old is doing it out of innocence, and whatever, someone like Trudeau is doing it out of ignorance and stupidity and maybe racism. I don't know. I don't want to throw that out there until you know more about it. But like I said, the kid is innocence, and an adult, that's, at the very least, that's ignorance and stupidity.
Right. And for most kids, when they're, wearing costumes and whatnot, there's a real simple principle of play happening where they are imagining and fantasizing and being a character. So they're kind of stepping into the world of another character and sometimes of another culture, right? So if you wear the Mulan costume, or you wear the Pocahontas costume, or Aladdin or Jasmine or whatever the costume, right? Like, those are kids that are actually literally trying to step into the world of another character. Now, it might be the character as personified by, Disney's version of someone from the Middle East, which could inherently be stereotyped and biased, and probably is because it's Disney. But the gist is, here's the irony of people getting pissed off at kids wearing costumes from a different culture or race or whatever. The people who want so badly to end racism and oppression use techniques like stepping into the shoes of another person, trying to empathize with another person's point of view. So isn't it fascinating that they're going to bully college students and even little kids about trying to literally step into the shoes of another person and play and act as if and imagine what it's like to be that other person, when that's exactly what these corporate hacks who come to corporate diversity trainings are teaching people to do. Try to pretend as if you're the other person. Try to see through their eyes. Yet these 9-year-olds are trying to do that in costumes, and they're being badmouthed for doing it. But people pay thousands of dollars to get taught how to do that as adults. So what's the problem here?
Yeah, but now it's like, unfortunately, what you're talking about there, okay, empathize and put yourself in the other person's shoes.
Yeah.
Okay, that used to be kind of what it was supposed to be. Now there's no way you'll ever know what the other person's experience is like, because a person of color can can understand the white person's way of doing things because they live in the white world, and it's a white way of knowing, a white way of doing things, and then they can also understand their own lived experience, whereas a white person can't. So a person of color has two of that. So and then if you ask, well, can you explain your experience to me, that you're told back, well, if you do that, that's racist, and that's you're exploiting their experience to better understand, but you'll never understand. You're supposed to understand. So I mean, now they don't even want you to empathize with the person. They just want you to shut up and listen and do what you're told.
Sure.
I mean, there's a big difference between empathizing with someone's situation and trying to picture yourself in that situation and see, okay, this is where I went wrong, and trying to understand it, and there's then someone saying, you have to do this. This is what you're being told, and don't try to understand it. Just believe it and do it. I mean, those are two different approaches, and they're taking the second approach now.
Sure, absolutely. And to be fair, right, because I want to make sure I do my best to be intellectually honest about this, it's not that all critical theorists and all of these pro-critical theory people are at the extreme edge cases of the normal distribution. In fact, there are plenty of people who do critical theory research who, are anti-bias, anti-discrimination, who are just decent folks who are researchers or psychologists or whatever it is, sociologists, who really are concerned about prejudice. Maybe they have experienced prejudice themselves, so it kind of puts them in that field. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'll give you a real crystal clear example from my personal life. So I did a training in Compton the other day, or not Compton, it was near Compton. And it was in an all-black community, basically, And one of the other speakers there was, I forget the university he's from. He was an African-American guy. Dr. Brian Marks, I believe is his name, and he talked about implicit bias and stereotypes and things like that. And he gave a very well-reasoned, very thoughtful, non-dramatic, like non-edge case presentation of what implicit bias is, and helped people understand what their implicit biases are. He used kind of classic examples like, who do you like better, LeBron James or Kobe Bryant? Right, and kind of like talking about what your implicit bias, because you don't even have to think about it to know who you like better, right? Yeah. And that's a good trick, right, to kind of get people to start thinking about the concept in an unbiased way, in a non-ego threatening way. He did a very, very good job. He's very smart, very funny. But then there are these people that you and I hear about and we interact with on Twitter and in other places, and the people that attack, James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, that are the edge cases, that are doing terrible things and are using critical theory as a machete and not as a scalpel to kind of dissect things, and that's not what it was designed for. So the problem that we find is the people on the edge cases they're the loudest, they're the nastiest, they're the meanest. They're the people that take a scalpel kind of instrument and use it as a machete, and that's the problem that we face.
Yeah, okay. The edge cases and all that, I will grant you that, but I think this is more than just edge cases now, because it is in schools.
Yes.
Right? It is being taught from K through 12. So that's not an edge case anymore, right? That's become mainstream.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we've got a minority government in Canada, thank God. But the Liberal Party says that the lens they will use to look at all policy decisions is the lens of gender-based analysis plus. So that's intersectionality plus queer theory and gender theory.
Wow.
So they are going to use that as the lens to decide all policy. Now, I'm sorry, that is now mainstream.
Yeah.
Right? So things like this, like, yes, the loudest people, the craziest people, you might say, are the fringe, but that fringe is getting bigger, and I think a lot of it is people just going along with it and not truly understanding, like, because it's I keep harping on the book because it's great, but it's Jonathan Rauch's Kindly Inquisitors, because what he talks about is the humanitarian threat, and this is what it is, right? It's don't you want to fight racism? Don't you want to fight homophobia? Like, it's yes, like, and again, you brought up those people who are doing the thoughtful work. This is like, causes of racism, how you can temper it, how you can get people to, not go along with their instinct or whatever, right? Like, you can, that's important. It needs to be talked about, and it's still an issue. It's not as bad as it was. It's gotten, markedly better, or at least it did until this stuff started coming in. But you're just using the wrong tools. Yeah. And it's like, that's, I think this is harder to fight than, sorry that I'm rambling here. I'll give you an example. Like Charlie Kirk recently, and Charlie Kirk is someone I can't stand. Right? I think he's a really odious person. Sure. But at least he called out these white supremacists, and he said, we have, and we can get into the whole argument, like how much did he push them along, whatever. Like, I don't want to, but when he saw that at one point, it's like, this is easy to say, no, we don't want that, right? Yeah. It's very easy to cordon off. Yeah. While don't you want to fight racism? It's like when you're fighting against, like, you're saying, like, no, that's the wrong way to go about it. Like, anti-racism is just one of the worst things to fight racism with. Mm-hmm. But when they come at you with don't you want to fight racism, it's like, how do you cordon that off?
Right. And I think that's why it's important, like you literally just did with Charlie Kirk, right? So you might find him despicable in most cases, but then once in a while he will do something positive or that you agree with, and you need to call that out and speak to that, because if we keep seeing people as these unidimensional creatures where they're all bad, black and white thinking or distorted thinking, right? No one supports that except for the anti-racists, it seems like. No psychologist worth their salt, to use a Jordan Peterson phrase, believes that you should use a cognitive distortion like black and white thinking to survive and function in a nuanced issue. So the fact that Charlie Kirk did do something good by calling out those alt-right morons is a great thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that Charlie's a great guy or that his ideas make sense. It just means that he did one good thing, and we should acknowledge that. Because if we don't acknowledge the sane moments, then people will start to lose sight of what sane looks like, right? Even from insane people. That's the thing that we have to do consistently. That's why I brought up Dr. Brian Marks, because I want people to know that even if, let's say, he is radical, but he just was really not radical that one day, it's possible to talk about these ideas in a non-radical way. That's extremely important, right? We have to talk about the same moments that exist. And the problem is we have this very polarized us versus them thing. So when I present my paper in January at the Heterodoxy in Psychology Conference, I'm actually going to talk about the virtues of critical theory and why it's still important, which is going to probably piss some people off that I like. And that's okay, because I want to make sure that we don't use dichotomous thinking. It doesn't serve anyone. That's a problem.
Okay, I was speaking with a friend of mine, and he does coaching, and he also does therapy. And he was talking about how he's coming across now. People come into his practice, say, well, I've got anxiety, I'm overweight, and I'm white. Mm-hmm. And they're like, and I'm white. And that's something that, I don't want to go into the whole litany of racism and how things were bad, in the United States. You can talk about, redlining, Jim Crow, slavery. Yeah. There's a lot of horrible stuff, right? Yeah. Things have gotten progressively better, but to then turn around and say, okay, well, you were the cause of it, so for, you did this for 300 years, so for the next 300 years, you're going to be feeling the heel of it. I mean, they're the majority of the population right now. Do you really want to do that? Like, like like I said, that again, that's why I'm worried about the way this is coming into the school system, because if you have this coming into the school system and you've got all these people feeling this way, the white supremacists are going to have, their pick of the crop of who they want. Yeah. People like Antifa, same thing. Okay, take a look at ISIS. Now, right. All of a sudden in 2015, I shouldn't say all of a sudden, but around 2015, that's when majority of the foreign fighters started going there, right? Mm. I mean, these people just didn't at the drop of a hat. Like, this stuff had been, when you're talking about in the United States and Europe, this stuff was being taught in universities, was being taught in schools.
Sure. Yeah.
So you've got a language now of why you're a victim. Mm-hmm. Why you're feeling dissatisfied, and then someone is offering you something, like you said, okay, come join us, you'll be a part of something bigger than you. We'll fight the oppression, we'll fight the West, we'll fight whatever, right? We'll fight colonialism, any of this stuff. And it just, you're taking people at a very pliable time in their lives, and you're molding them into something that, like I said, any extremist is going to pick off. And I mean, that I'm more worried, like, I'm not worried about left-wing violence so much as I am right-wing violence. I think the right wing could be far more violent. Mm-hmm. And again, these left-right terms don't mean much. So yeah, I mean, like, I'm looking at this and I'm really worried about the overcorrection, and I see it brewing and I see it happening, and yet these people are just still going along saying, oh, look how divisive they are, and they're creating divisions. Sorry for that rant.
Yeah, no, that's all well said, and I think that's the concern that many people have that are kind of in the middle, in the center of the political spectrum nowadays. Is this is kind of ridiculous what's going on, and both sides are going to overcorrect. So what the hell do we do, right? And back to the kids' point, I want to focus on that for just a second, because I think that's extremely important. So there is no sane developmental psychologist who says you should teach a kid to hate their identity. None. There's no reasonable person of any professional background who thinks that makes sense. And I don't think, like you're saying, the vast majority of people who are teaching this curriculum actually really know what it's about and really know where critical theory comes from. They really don't get it at all. They're just teachers who have been taught that diversity is important and inclusion is important. They've been taught that if they don't teach people to not be biased and prejudiced, that bad things will happen and maybe they'll be considered racist themselves, right? Like, that's probably the average person in, like, New York City that just spent millions of dollars training people on this bullshit, right? So the problem is that you have to do both, in my opinion. Like, I think if you really want to raise kids in such a way that they are thoughtful and they are open-minded, that they do need to go, okay, how am I built? What do I look like? What do I sound like? What does that mean about me as a person? I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think teaching kids self-reflection is perfectly cool. I think teaching them to say, because I'm white, or because I'm black, or because I'm Hispanic of some sort, whatever it is, right? And because I sound like this, that I should be extra worried, or I should be extra sensitive, or I should walk on eggshells, or whatever it is, that's ludicrous to me. That makes literally no sense. You're creating an anxiety disorder in a kid, and there's no reason for that. But to say, hey, I want to make sure that I'm nice to people no matter what they look like or sound like, that's perfectly reasonable. Teach kids that shit all day long. That's Barney 101, essentially. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't like Barney, but I think there's nothing wrong with that concept, right?
Yeah. Barney, yeah, well, okay, let's not get into the pros and cons of Barney the dinosaur. But yeah, okay, no, but that's just it. But it's still, I mean, what you're talking about is what I was taught. You're going to see people who are different.
Yeah.
But just because they look different doesn't mean they think, feel, and act differently.
Right.
And so, get to know people and judge them, like, on the content of their character, not on the color of their skin, right? I mean, yeah. Okay, and I've got no skin in this game. I've got no kids. I've got a niece and a nephew. But the only skin I've got in this is these are the people who are going to be the politicians, the lawyers, the doctors, or whatever. They're going to write the policy. My old age pension through my government is going to be decided upon by these people, and if my government right now is making policy based on this stuff that's going to affect me when I'm at retirement age, Yeah, that's where I have issues with this, right? And like, fine, it's very selfish.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I've traveled quite a bit. I've seen people at pretty much their worst, and what we have is pretty much the best system of governance.
Sure.
The ideas of the Enlightenment, and that offends me that someone wants to take that apart and take it for granted and not see how good it is. And out of any I really don't like making arguments from this, but that's, if I'm going to take an offense at anything out of this whole stuff, it's that. And I don't see how this. Okay, there's that they're teaching kids how to feel sorry for themselves, or give them excuses for why they might fail. Right. There's that, but then this whole idea of that the system we're in is so bad and so evil that it needs to be taken down. And
no, that's a problem. I mean, think of if it was just as simple as teaching people logic, this would have been done a long time ago, because even like angry radical person can sit back in their calm moments and go, okay, compared to Afghanistan, compared to Saudi Arabia, compared to any number of countries where there's outright oppression that is outright killing people, like murdering people on the daily in horrific identitarian ways. The U.S. is not bad. Canada is not bad. Germany is not. Like, you could make a real simple argument that, basically speaking, none of these countries, if in just your simplest logical form, are not bad. In fact, they're way above board in many ways. The problem is, it's not a logic problem that these people who are radical activists or radical critical theorists are facing. It's an emotion problem, as I argue in my book and as I'm going to argue in the paper that I'm presenting in January. These people are hijacked emotionally pretty consistently. They've been sensitized, just like a person who has PTSD has been sensitized to specific triggers, specific stimuli, right? So if you were traumatized because you were assaulted by a 68-year-old Caucasian male, then that's probably the specific trigger that you're going to be sensitive to before you get therapy to deal with that PTSD, right? So every 68-year-old Caucasian male is going to trigger you in some way, shape, or form, and that's a big deal, and you need to deal with that trigger in therapy, and there are tons of evidence-based therapies for that. The problem is that these critical theorists are saying, I'm not going to deal with the fact that I'm sensitive, and I'm going to use my sensitivity and my bias and my fear and my instincts to run the show. That's a problem. So they can't logically go, well, Canada, the U.S., Germany, Britain, even though there's still some kind of patriarchal whatever and da-da-da-da-da, it's way better than about 100 countries on the planet.
And maybe I'm wrong here too. Like, and this is just coming out of the new study that the Heterodox Academy did about Jordan Peterson. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not a huge Peterson fan, right?
Sure.
He came into the spotlight because of the bill in Canada, and I liked what he had to say about free speech. But majority of a lot of his other stuff, Douglas Murray said it best when he used that term, Jesus smuggling, and that's my big beef with Peterson. But
yeah,
I mean, I'm looking at this stuff and I'm thinking, okay, are we kind of doing the same thing here? Because there is some. Okay, I'm not saying that this is like. Some of this social justice stuff is really big, like coming into schools, attacking, like today, like I saw a bunch of people attacking science, just outright saying, okay, science is not, there is no such thing as objective truth, science, horrible, but like, when you're going after someone like Jordan Peterson, I'm like, I think you're forgetting some things. I think we're being algorithmed into believing that we're more extreme than we are.
Sure.
So, like, I'll give you the example, like the thing that the Heterodox Academy did, like, okay, the word search and the similar words and all that. But did you look at, so when Peterson first came out and started speaking out against the bill, and everyone labeled him a transphobe and this and that, right? The typical litany of crap. So the algorithms picked up on that. So you watch a Peterson video and it's recommended for you next is something along those lines. So it's like, is the algorithm doing? Is it that the algorithm's doing, or is that Peterson's doing? Right.
Right.
Like, I mean, again, I think when we're arguing, like when someone like something like that comes out from like a place like the Heterodox Academy. Now it's one study, and I don't know who did it. And again, it's the Heterodox Academy, so they are open to different points of view. Right. That's the whole point of them. So maybe that's why they published it. Like,
Sure.
I don't know anything beyond that point, but I think like this study and the one that was done, I can't remember who did it, like the Media Matters thing from a little while back.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the things like no one's looking at. It's like, how is the algorithm itself affecting how this is doing? Like, and was the algorithm not written by critical race theorists, but the people who were programming it were directed by, human resources and whatever, and diversity training, who are trained in this stuff, and they were giving the impetus to the programmers of this is what we want the algorithm to look for. So it that's being put into the algorithm. Like, again, this is tinfoil hat Alex Jones stuff from my end. I'm just kind of talking this out as I go. So
yeah, and I think what was it? It was at the New York Times or someone just came out with an article that said that they finally figured out that Google was altering their algorithms and stuff like that for searches and things like that, and everyone just jumped all over it like, oh, we've been talking about this for years, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so here's the problem, is that ideology cuts both ways. Algorithm manipulation, or let's call it statistical manipulation, cuts both ways. So, yeah, it's probably a very fair hypothesis that, algorithms aren't created in such a way that they're as neutral or, let's say, unbiased as they could be, because all creatures are biased, right? Mm-hmm. But it's also the same problem, and the reason the critical theorists and all those people are pissed at the objectivity of Western science and the scientific method. So as much as we might giggle at that because we kind of basically know how it works and the intention of, the scientific method, here's the problem. So in the stats world, statistics world, structural equation modeling and more advanced upper level statistics, linear regression and things of that nature, if you manipulate the way you enter data and the way you create models, you can in effect get whatever outcome you want. So technically speaking, you can have just as hackable and biasable an outcome as you would with a Google AI metric or YouTube AI metric. So they're right in one way to be skeptical of the biased way that some scientists might be creating outcomes using statistics, right? There's an article that came out, a paper that came out earlier this year by Jellison and colleagues, and they found that over 56% of psychology and psychiatry abstracts, titles, and conclusion sections were way overblown, trying to state a case, right? So because of all the issues in the publication crisis and replication crisis and all the issues in psychology and fee for publishing and all that stuff, we do have a problem of bias. We do have a problem of trying to make things true, right? So there's an objectivity problem in the objective sciences to a degree, especially in the psychology and psychiatry journals. Maybe not so much in physics and chemistry and all that stuff. But both sides have some points. They have some validity. And I think if we acknowledge that validity in a very nuanced and specific way, we can actually help them calm down and listen to our point of view better.
Yeah. And I mean, okay, the science thing, I think one of the biggest ones you can say is the sugar study through Harvard, right? Like now, because it's such a blatant thing. Now, I think they're getting confused with science as a body of knowledge, and they're looking at that. Okay, see, this is science. Scientists do this. They skew data. They do. Okay, that was caught out, and that's bad science, and that's the methodology in and of itself is supposed to catch that, right? If you follow the methodology, and like, let's say you come up with you've done a study, you've done a bunch of tests, and you've done, you log all your data, you say this is how I did everything, and then teams of psychologists in different universities in 4 or 5 different locations look at your methodology, agree with that it was good, follow that, and come up with very similar results. That's peer review. That's okay. And that's how it's meant to work, right? If the methodology is solid, the peer review system, everything works. Now, yes, you're dealing with people, and you could slip someone a couple of bucks. I'm not saying you would or whatever, and then and they could accept it, and they could say, okay, fine, we did it, and they kind of fudge the numbers a little bit. That can happen, but if you apply that rigor and that methodology to it at any given point, that'll be exposed.
Sure.
Whereas the other side has no, as far as they can tell, they have no real rigor.
Right, absolutely. They have a theory that guides their behavior, and anything that can be loosely fitted into that theory is gold for them. I just made fun of thanks to James, I just made fun of a set of slides, and the citation from the person presenting at NYU was from a website. There were no real citations. There was no academic anything. It was just, there's these 500 biases or whatever, according to this website called groupthink.com. I'm sure it's perfectly valid and reputable and scientific and shit, right? Like, yeah, of course, people like that are going to slip through the cracks, and we have to call it out when we see it. And hopefully, the theory is not corrupting people. The problem is, again, if you don't give the devil its due, then people will feel shut down. So I'm really, really big on making sure people who are critical theorists, or people who are kind of, let's say, Antifa or whatever it is, like whatever the radical notion is, that they're given a voice, and that the parts of their concerns, even if they're minuscule, that are valid, are validated. Because what I see a lot, especially in the online world, is I see people kind of responding with generalizations and not giving them any of their due. And that's a problem, because that's going to turn them off right away. Automatic fight. But if you can actually, like, I've been confronted a number of times in the last 2 months, and every time that I've been confronted, I've always walked away from the debate with them liking me. And the reason that the opponent likes me is because I hear them out, I speak reasonably, I acknowledge where they are correct, even though I may think that the majority of their point is wrong, or that they're ideologically biased. I always give them their due, and I've not walked out of a Twitter fight with an enemy.
Yeah. I mean, okay, again, there is valid things, but, and I don't disagree with anything you're saying, and the only but I have here is, it's kind of hard when someone is that ideological, and that's the way their thinking goes, and their worldview doesn't allow them to give you the same credence, and so they might not even want to listen to you. It depends on how far along they are, right?
Right.
If they're too far, they don't care that you agree with one of it. For them, it's a zero sum.
Sure. Sure. And I think that's where maybe my training as a shrink is probably helpful to a degree, because I'm specifically trained to deal with people who are resistant to change. Like, that's my whole shtick.
Yeah.
Is talking to people who don't necessarily want to change their mind, and getting, like, with one of the hardest things on the planet, to stop using drugs specifically. Like, that is my whole shtick. So I think, the art, because it's an art, there's a science to it, but the art of it is really the hard part. So being able to recognize why someone's defensive, where the pain is, where the fear is, etc., that's making them want to dig their heels in and deal with that pain and that fear and that resistance, that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's where most people, that's where, like, the academics are going to fail miserably. I love Peter and James and Helen, but they're going to fail because they're really not trained in such a way to really fully deal with the resistance of people. They're trained to be correct, but they're not trained to think, reflect, and be emotional with people. It's a very different set of skills that they don't necessarily have. So the goal is to kind of leverage the human side of you in a way that actually allows people to connect with you. And that's the hardest thing, is to overcome that initial hump with the people who really are ideologically and emotionally invested.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, I get what you're saying, and full disclosure, I dig my heels in. No, but it's,
yeah.
For me, it's also, part of it is, like, I feel like I'm being patronized, because you know what, oh, you need protection. You're a brown person. We need to save. And it's like, screw off. Like, not only do I not only do like I see this and I'm like, no, you guys are wrong, but at the same time, there's this condescending attitude of, oh, we need to protect you brown people because you can't take care of yourself. And fuck you, I can. And and then there's another worse aspect to it, like from the white supremacist, ethno-realist, whatever the hell you want to call those racist guys.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys can't fix your own shit. We got to come fix it for you. Or screw you, go and we'll wash our hands with you because we don't want to fix your shit anymore.
Yeah.
With like these left-wing guys, it's like I call them benevolent bigots. It's like, oh no, we have to come fix your stuff. But not only do we have to come fix it for you, see, you were too stupid to have caused it on your own. If it wasn't for us, you wouldn't be in this mess. We had to cause your problems for you. And like, I'm like, no, that's even. Yes, I can cause my own problems, God damn it. I don't need you to cause my problems for me. I'm more than capable of doing it. And a lot of these countries are as well. Like,
yeah.
Oh, okay, Douglas Murray's, not this book now, but the one before it, The Strange Death of Europe. He has it in the book, and he talked about it earlier. I'd heard him speak about it in an interview a couple of years before the book came out. And it was a story about this journalist speaking to Arafat. Everything's finished. Journalist is packing up. One of Arafat's aides comes in and tells Arafat that the American delegation is here. So the journalist, being a journalist, oh, why is the American delegation here? Apparently Arafat started laughing and said the American delegation is doing a tour of the Middle East to apologize for the Crusades. Now, what the hell did the U.S. have to do the Crusades, and why are they going apologizing? And that's what it seems like to me. It's like, screw you. But it is so condescending that, we caused your problems and we have to come fix them for you because you're too facile to have done it or to have fixed it. And I'm like, don't talk to me like that.
So, totally. Yeah, no, I get that. I respect that, man. It's very, very difficult if people are taking away your sense of agency because, one of the things that we really want as creatures is to feel like we have power and we have volitional capacity. And, for the kind of the fringe people who are spouting this ideology, they talk about it in such a way that you are some kind of inept moron because your skin color is such, or your gender is such, or your sexual preference is such. And it's like, okay, that probably feels kind of bad, right? Yeah. Of course it feels bad. But see, the thing is, that's where, it's really important in your debates and in your arguments to really be cognizant of your stuff, right? That's one of the reasons why I think I've been very successful with people is I don't care about my personal stuff. Like, the fact that I'm a male means almost nothing to me. The fact that I'm bisexual means literally nothing to me. I just like to fuck a lot of people. Like, the fact, whatever it is, it means literally nothing to me when I'm debating ideas because they're just ideas. And my goal is to see whatever the truth is, whatever's actually going to affect change for either of us in the moment. It just does not matter insofar as we're talking about an idea. Now, obviously, if I'm in a personal circumstance with someone, those categorical memberships do matter because I might be personal with them. Yeah. But if I'm debating someone on Twitter in a more or less academic way, my identity really does not matter that much. It's like it's a red herring that my identity should matter in any way, shape, or form about any of these things. The fact that I'm tall should mean almost literally nothing about my ideas in the sense of like, well, let's talk about how racism really plays out in the world. My height should mean nothing. Like, one of my favorite quotes from, what is his name? Coleman Hughes. One of my favorite quotes from him is, at some point I want race to be as interesting as height. Right? Yeah. Something to that effect. And it's like, yeah, absolutely. We'll notice it. It might have some practical limitations, maybe, because if you're particularly short, you can't reach things. If you're a particular skin color, that might mean that certain kinds of people hate you stupidly, right? There's a limitation there, right? Other than that, it shouldn't be terribly interesting. Like, up until the fact that you and I are chatting right now, I totally forgot what you look like. It just doesn't register to me on Twitter when we're chatting.
Yeah, but that's just it. Okay, like, I'm the same way. Like, I don't care about... I don't... It's not in the back of my mind that, I'm brown, I was born in India, I got Arab, and I couldn't care about that. No, but okay, let's say we were, someone's interviewing me and they're talking to me and they're asking me about my background. Yes, then that matters, right?
Sure.
But in the idea sphere, but like I said, when the idea that I'm trying to counter is, like so hyper focused on my identity. I mean, you can't help but think about it because it's being thrown in your face, right? And it's like, no. Again, I like I said when I was speaking to Jimmy the other week about this, that he was bringing in Jimmy's gay and he's an ex-Muslim, and he went to this. There was a meeting from an inclusive mosque. So there, these progressive mosques coming up. A few in Europe. There's a couple in Canada, I think, and maybe around the United States. And there's no segregation of men and women. They have, if it is a specifically an open progressive mosque, they will have in the mosque meetings for, LGBTQ Muslims, so they can discuss that and whatever. But there was this progressive Muslim group that was having this meeting in London. And they had to have it in a community center or a church basement because they couldn't host it in any mosque because no mosque will have them, right? And if they did, there's a physical danger.
Yeah.
But they have bought in wholeheartedly into critical race theory so that they are spending all their time discussing the white man and how the white man is bad. And Jimmy is like, but wait a minute. Why are you doing it here? Your biggest threat is not the average white Brit. When 52% of Muslims think it's a criminal offense and should be punished by jail in the UK, when I think it's something like 95% say it's wrong and 52% say you should be put in prison, like, isn't your bigger threat the Muslim population, not the white man? But it's turning, they're losing focus on what the actual problem is, right? And it's hurting the people that they're trying to help. Because, and then, okay, I'll let you go after this. I'll let you speak of this, right? Linda Sarsour, I hate this woman. Again, another person I do not like. But she is using this language to gain credibility, and she is... she's a theocrat. She's a Muslim extremist. She wants to push Sharia law, but she's using the language of intersectionality and critical race theory of how she's a victim, how they're all victims, and she's being lauded. She's a surrogate for Bernie. Yeah. Bernie's letting her ride along on his coattails, and this stuff is so easy to subvert that there's my example of someone who wants to radicalize people using this stuff to do it. And it's there in practice. It's in our face. I don't know if you got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to your buddy Jimmy's example, right? Like, it's really sad that people are, let's say, confused about the threat that's in front of them. And that's partially because, we're a very kind of primitive species. Even though we think we're sophisticated, we're actually really not. And the truth of the matter is, from my point of view at least, or at least my reading of things, or at least my reading of the literature on like evolutionary theory and stuff, is if you have a group identity that is so emotionally meaningful or instinctually meaningful, it's going to overpower any of your critical thinking skills. That's just full stop. That's how we work. So our goal is to kind of have this more like I call adaptive group identity in my book, like this shades of gray view of who we are. And that's why it's so important, I think, at least my professional opinion, is to kind of acknowledge what is that makes sense about their view, right? So let's talk about how white people are bad. Okay, cool. So I'm going to have that conversation with you, and I will, in full good faith, go, okay, historically, what have people with this skin color done? And I'm happy to have that conversation. And how are people like Richard Spencer, for instance, he's probably the white version of Linda Sarsour, and I can't stand him, and I don't wish bad things to happen to him, but I just wish he would go away and never talk again. Like they exist. And saying they don't exist and pretending like people with that ideology, like Sam Harris did a great talk with someone who was specifically studying white supremacy. I forget the researcher's name, smart lady, I forget her name though. And the truth of the matter is it exists. So if we don't talk about it, and it's still a problem. It might not be as giant and cultural a problem as it was in the 1950s in the U.S. and other places, but it's still there, and it's still a problem. Let's talk about it. I'm happy to have that conversation. Like the whole colorblind thing. When the critical theorists say, color blindness is racism, sure, fully agreed. You're a moron if you think you don't have prejudice based upon skin color. That's insane. Like, we are naturally tribal creatures, so we're going to go, okay, looks a little different, what should I be thinking about? That's perfectly normal. That's why implicit bias is, basically speaking, an okay concept. Now, the way it's used like, a sledgehammer is ridiculous, but the fact that it basically makes sense from our instinctual point of view, sure. But how do we talk about it in a nuanced way? That's the problem, is that these people are using nuclear bombs where a scalpel is needed. And that's ridiculous. The Linda Sarsours and the Richard Spencers of the world are nuclear bomb figures. And it's just so gross the way they generalize and just use theory and pandering and virtue signaling and all these appeals to our primitive process to just stir up all sorts of negative, tribalistic, us versus them crap. It's gross.
Okay.
It's so gross.
Richard Spencer, I think this is a really good example of this. Now, he was, whatever. He had his following. He had his thing. He got punched on the inauguration, like Trump's first inauguration day, right? He got punched in the face. Yeah. The whole punch a Nazi thing started. Yeah. That rose his fame. That gave him credence. That gave him some sort of standing, right? He got more popularity after that.
Sure.
When that video just got released, or Milo Yiannopoulos, to try to get some credibility back himself, released that audio of Richard Spencer.
Yeah.
That's done more to damage Richard Spencer's credibility than that punch in the face. Yes. So, yes, bring Richard Spencer on a stage. Let him spew his nonsense. I have no problem with that. It's the critical race theorists who say, how dare you have this person? How dare you have that conversation? You speak to them, therefore, because you spoke to them, you're evil. That's why Daryl Davis is a white supremacist, even though he's a black man who converted or deconverted 200 KKK members personally, right? He's a white supremacist because he speaks to KKK members. Now, right? I mean, So, yes, I'm willing to. Okay, I shouldn't say I'm willing to sit down and talk with, but I would sit down and talk with Richard Spencer to have him air his views. I'd sit down and talk with Linda Sarsour. I think, like I said, I do not like this woman. I think she's absolutely horrible. But I want her to give her bullshit and air it out. I want people to see her for what she is.
Absolutely. And I made the same argument in my video on hate speech, that the best way for these people to go away is if they're allowed to speak more and more and more, so people see and hear just how ridiculous they are and how sick they are. Because essentially in the wild, we're very, very highly attuned to sickness. Like, we look for signs, physical and verbal signs, that someone's sick. So we need them to be out there spouting their sickness so that we can identify them and ignore them appropriately.
Yeah. Listen, I don't want to take up too much of your time, because, like I said, basically you're just you're just humoring me and my crazy theories here.
We're humoring each other, trust me.
But listen, I'll give you the last word, because I know you wanted to, we have been talking about theory or whatever. If you have anything else to say on it, plug your book. Where can people find you?
Sure. So I'll start with the plug, and then I'll start with my final thoughts from what was the Jerry Springer show? So, so you can find me at patricklockwoodhealing.com. You can find me on YouTube, The Psychology Checkup. You can find my book, The Fear Problem, on Amazon, on my website, and on mascotbooks.com. So yeah, basically what I would say is, I get why people can't stand critical theory, right? Like, I'm with James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian and everyone else who just cannot stand critical theory. Definitely get Helen's new book with James. Definitely get Peter's new book and all that. Like, shameless plug for them too. Here's the problem. The problem is everyone's overreacting both directions, right? And I see that as problematic, which is one of your points earlier about this being taught in schools and creating white supremacist kids and all that stuff, right? And I see that as a problem on both sides, and I can't help but go, okay, how do we deal with critical theory in such a way that things actually are talked about realistically? So I think that's going to require, to be quite fair, an honest discussion of why critical theory is useful, which might sound like a misnomer at this point, why critical theory has value, why critical theory needs to be alive, why critical theory needs to keep being applied to things, and why we need to keep shouting out, not shouting down, just shouting out, calling out the edge cases who are radical, who are using a theory, a method that should be used like a scalpel, as a sledgehammer, or worse, like a nuclear bomb. That's a problem. Because what we're talking about are highly, highly nuanced things. Racism is a highly nuanced thing. It's not just a you're brown, you're white, you're bad, you're good. It's not that simple. I'm sorry. So if we talk about critical theory in a nuanced way, we talk about the ills of critical theory in a nuanced way, and we talk about the benefits of critical theory in a nuanced way, we talk about the people espousing critical theory in a nuanced way, I think we will actually have a better dialogue, and we might be more able to change some minds. That's my hope, is to grab the people who are not the edge cases in the critical theory world and to grab their attention by being reasonable with them and help them see the nuances of their theory, how it works, how it hurts, etc., and how it shouldn't be applied as a sledgehammer, right? That's my hope, and that's my kind of my final pitch and my final thought.
All right, no, that's good, and I mean, I can't really find much fault in that because, yes, I do agree with you. There is, intersectionality. There is some legitimate claims there. The fighting racism. Yes, I'm all on board with that. We want, like whatever, homophobia, transphobia. Yes, let's reduce the amount of prejudice to as small as possible, and let's give people the tools to okay, you know what? Maybe I can take a step back. Why am I doing this? Why am I, walking down the street at 2 a.m. and, whatever. I'm a fairly large sized guy, but if I saw 3 guys, I don't care what skin color really, but if I saw 3 large guys walking in the other direction, 2 a.m, I'm by myself, I will be more alert and I'll be more careful. And, but you got to realize that. And, some of it is, okay, it's downtown Montreal. It's a fairly civilized place. Probably not much is going to happen. There probably is drunk as I am. But anyways, thank you very much for talking. And I'll put all your links, everything at the bottom. And thank you everyone for listening.
All right. No problem. Thanks for having me.